Hello and welcome back to the Football Fan Fanatics Podcast. I'm James Palin and joining me once again is my mum, Nadine Dereza.
Hello there. Good to see you again, James.
Yeah, nice to see you again. The new season, as we know, is already moving at full speed with the Premier League underway, the Carabao Cup second round taking place, and the summer transfer window approaching its 1st of September deadline. And in today's episode, which will be an extended episode because Nadine and I have been away, she's also lost her voice, unfortunately, but it's back to scratch now. We'll be going in depth on 10 major stories making headlines across world football. Arsenal's impressive 3-0 start against Coventry, including the impact of new signing of Christos Zolis, the left winger. Chelsea's exciting attacking trio of João Pedro, Cole Palmer, and Morgan Rogers, alongside the worrying performance of Robert Sánchez in goal. We'll be looking at Hull City's surprise victory over Manchester United and why United struggled so badly. Newcastle's excellent performance against Liverpool, despite only drawing 2-2, although many people over the summer having major concerns about Newcastle and where they stood following Eddie Howe leaving and a collective loss of players. We'll be looking at, of course, Erling Haaland's new haircut and whether he has somehow lost his footballing powers, Celtic's recent extraordinary Champions League collapse against LASK, United signing Carlos Baleba from Brighton, Tottenham agreeing a deal for Omar Marmoush and Savinho, Nottingham Forest moving in for Liam Delap, and Barcelona closing in on goalkeeper Dominik Livakovic. So there's so much to get through, especially coming up to the transfer window. And because this is an extended episode, we're going to spend more time than usual looking into the tactics, the individual performances, and what these results might mean for the rest of the season. So let's start with Arsenal because they kicked off the Premier League for us and they made an extremely impressive beginning to their title defence by beating Coventry City 3-0 at the Emirates. Nadine, this was not just a routine opening day victory. Arsenal, they dominated Coventry, and for long periods, Coventry could barely get near them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got my voice back, so hopefully it won't be lost again during this episode. Yes, it was a really convincing display, wasn't it? I mean, Arsenal scored through their old guard, including Kai Havertz, Bukayo Saka, and Martin Odegaard, and they controlled the match almost from the first whistle. I did feel a bit sorry for newly promoted Coventry that their first match of the season was against last season's title winners. That must be, a difficult draw to face. So it was always going to be a big ask to get much from the game if you were coming from it from the lens of Coventry. Yes, so very convincing by Arsenal though.
Yeah, and what stood out for me was just how quickly Arsenal established control. They weren't simply passing the ball around the back and keeping possession for the sake of it. Like we see with lots of big sides, they were very fluid, creating connections between the fullbacks, midfielders, and forwards, and constantly trying to move Coventry's low defensive blocks set out by Frank Lampard from side to side. And actually, Coventry didn't even make a tackle in the first half, and they didn't have a touch in Arsenal's penalty area during that period, which just goes to show how dominant Arsenal were. The first tackle of the match did not arrive until the 69th minute, which at that point, Arsenal, of course, were already 3-0 up. So what does that say, Nadine?
Well, it tells you, doesn't it, how dominant Arsenal were, although Coventry will argue that they were also made to look poor by the quality and the intensity of Arsenal's football. So, if that's the worst defeat they're going to get all season, then the only way is up for them.
Yeah, it is very difficult to come in against Arsenal away from home as well as your first game. Ideally for Coventry fans, they would have wanted to be at home. They would have wanted to set the tone, just like Hull and Ipswich did, which we'll be speaking about more. So it's important to not reduce it to Coventry simply having a bad night because Arsenal created that situation. Their press was aggressive, their counter pressing was immediate, and they're very good at winning the ball back in an advanced area. The first goal is a great example of that. Zolis, who I just think is fantastic. I've got him in my fantasy football team actually as well, so maybe there's a bit of bias there, but he won possession from Milan Van Nieuwijk deep inside Coventry territory. And then Ricardo Calafiori delivered a low cross and Kai Havertz finished well. And that goal was not created by one spectacular piece of skill. It came from Arsenal attacking Coventry before they had time to reset, didn't they?
Yeah, indeed. And Zolis, who actually played for Norwich back in 2021, I think, for a couple of seasons before moving abroad, he was actually involved again for the second goal. So, his force on the night was very, very apparent.
Yeah, and there's something about his force that really excites Arsenal fans. He's very direct and he's got a lot of pace. Probably something Arsenal fans were a bit not upset about, but wanted a bit more from Leandro Trossard. Martinelli did have that pace, but then Martinelli also didn't have that finishing touch. And hopefully for Arsenal's sake, Zolis is the perfect mixture of those two wingers. He's certainly quick, he's attacking, he's direct, and he hasn't scored yet, but he's making assists already. And his cross for Saka's goal was dangerous. But Coventry goalkeeper, of course, Carl Rushworth, could only palm it into Saka's path, and Saka had to react quickly. But Zolis created the situation for his delivery and his decision to attack the penalty area.
Well, I think you're wise to have him in your fantasy football team because actually he had several shots himself, so that bodes well for the rest of the season. And he looked really confident, didn't he, from the very beginning? I mean, I watched that game on Friday night. Luckily, I didn't have anything else on, so I saw it from the first minute right through to the last minute. And I think he looked very confident right from the beginning, right to the very end.
Yeah, as you said, Nadine had 4 shots, 2 of them on target, and he was a constant threat throughout the match. I can really see him becoming a goal scorer, a double-digit goal scorer for Arsenal this season. And what I liked as well was that he wasn't necessarily waiting for the ball. He was coming into areas, and maybe Arteta spoke to him saying he can come into pockets and pick up the ball. Whereas when we watched Martinelli, it seemed like he was hugging the sideline quite a lot. Um, and that's quite a big difference, because if Zolis can come into midfield and pick up the ball, it just confuses opposing defenses that little bit more. And he seems so willing to just attack, and run at defenders, and that changes the rhythm of the game.
It does indeed, and actually Martin Odegaard singled him out for praise afterwards, saying Zolas was lively. He said he was an intelligent and very difficult to defend. So I think that says it all really. Those 3 words. But what did you think about Martin's statement on Zolas?
For me, it makes a lot of sense, because he's not only a dribbler, is Zolis. He's also looking up before receiving the ball. His pass for Havertz, his cross for Saka, both came from recognising what was happening around him rather than blindly trying to beat the nearest defender, which, again, I don't want to criticise Martinelli too much for that, but I think that's what Martinelli was missing, was the decision-making in the final third. And Arsenal, they've paid around £34 million for Zolis after he scored 17 goals and provided 23 assists for Club Brugge in that previous season. So that is a significant investment, but it's also a profile that Arsenal have really needed. They've wanted another attacker capable of creating something without requiring 5 other players to be perfectly positioned.
Yeah, and you've already alluded to the fact that Zolas, you think, is going to be sort of double digits in terms of goal scoring. But I suppose the interesting question really is, can he become their main man in attack? And I think you may be saying yes to this, or is there a different answer?
I think he can, but don't forget Bukayo Saka, because he scored and he's excellent at receiving wide, coming inside and combining with Odegaard and Ben White. Now, it'll be interesting to see when Urian Timber is back from injury, whether that affects Ben White and his starting place. But what I tend to notice is Saka does really thrive off Ben White playing with him, because Ben White is much more likely to make overlapping runs and free up the space for Saka to cut inside, which he obviously loves to do. Whereas Timber, when he comes back and if he plays, he's a lot more defensive, so it's less support going forward for Saka. But in terms of Zolis, I personally believe he could be the main man for Arsenal. He looks the most direct out of all of them, the most multifaceted in his nature, where he can go down the line, he can cut inside, he can put in a good cross, he can have a shot. I just think with time and experience, he certainly could be the main man.
Yeah, and actually Havertz had a good game as well. We didn't watch it together. I thought he looked sharp. Did you, James?
Yeah, I did. I think that was another position where it was weighed up whether Havertz or Gyökeres would start, who of course as well had a great season last season. But Havertz, he's not a traditional centre forward. He drifts to the left, he drops into midfield, he looks to arrive late in the penalty area. But against Coventry, he was receiving the ball in great positions and was very active around the box. And the fact, again, as I mentioned, he started ahead of Victor Gyökeres will also create an interesting selection debate. And I personally can see those two constantly coming in and out, just depending on the opposition. I think Gyökeres could be really useful where perhaps teams are coming up a bit more and they want Gyökeres to win headers. But against lower blocks, potentially, Havertz is good. So it's going to be a back and forth between the two. And if one of them can get in a good rhythm, then maybe they can keep their place. And Arsenal now have different types of centre forward available rather than one established option. And then, of course, Odegaard, he scored the third goal, didn't he, Nadine?
Yeah, and actually my brother has actually picked him for his fantasy football team, so kudos to him. I think that's in a nod to our late great cousin who sadly died last year, who's an Arsenal fan. So I think probably Nick has my cousin Nick, also by the same name, in his thoughts. But yes, Odegaard, amazing. But going back to the goal, it was not the cleanest finish, was it? But the performance was much more important than the goal. Odegaard looked like the heartbeat of the team again. He was involved in Arsenal's combinations on the right. I mean, he helped control the tempo and he constantly positioned himself between Coventry's midfield and defence. So when Arsenal needed to accelerate, I mean, he played forward quickly, didn't he? But when they needed to keep Coventry moving, he circulated the ball and waited for the opening. And I think his form is significant because Arsenal are at the best when Odegaard is influential. And last season, cast your mind back, he was disrupted by injuries, but he looked much closer to his best in the opening match. And if he can carry on performing like that, then Arsenal could potentially retain their title this season.
Yeah, absolutely. He's obviously Arsenal's captain. Let's not forget that. And yeah, when Odegaard has a run of games, and we saw in the World Cup how important he was, how much he helped Haaland with his goal scoring form. If Odegaard can stay fit, then I can see him having a really, really good season. But just to park him there as well, I want to talk about Ben White and Saka again because they look very comfortable together again on that right-hand side, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, that right-sided relationship is one of Arsenal's biggest strengths. White can overlap, underlap or stay deeper while Saka can move inside. And then Odegaard then adds another passing option. And against Coventry, those three players were constantly exchanging positions. It was wonderful to watch. They were not simply standing in a straight line. There was that constant movement. And that movement made it difficult for Coventry to know whether to follow Saka, whether to track White or protect the central space for Odegaard. You can see their heads sort of spinning. And Arsenal's third goal, as we mentioned, came from that combination by Odegaard, Saka and White, working the ball through the right channel before Odegaard's finish found its way into the net. But then there's Ezri Konsa, who's just completed his £55 million move from Aston Villa, hasn't he?
I don't know where all this money's coming from, to be honest, but Arsenal are really, really strengthening, and it's a clear sign to the other teams that they want to go. They don't just want to defend this title. They want to win the league by 15 points and make a real statement, maybe go for the points record. But Konsa, again, another defender who's so comfortable defending large spaces. If Arsenal push their fullbacks high and dominate possession, the centre-backs may be left with a lot of grass behind them. So obviously they need defenders who can read danger early, recover quickly and remain calm. And Konsa gives Arteta that great depth. He's quick. And that's really important considering the fact that Arsenal want to be attacking on all fronts. They want to be winning the Cups, the Champions League, the Premier League again. So if you look at their squad now, even that second back four they have, it looks so strong. And yeah, it's going to be really hard to break down that team. What do you think about that, Nadine?
Yeah, I mean, Konza, he's a great defender, isn't he? Great personality. And I know Arteta's very pleased with the signing. And actually, there were several shots of Konza obviously watching in the stands because he didn't make it in time to play against Coventry. But where do you see Konza actually fitting in? I mean, it gives them lots of options, doesn't it?
Yes, it's really difficult because when Saliba's back and Timber's back, then it does change the dynamic. Right now, I think he'll be rotated, so it's a matter of if he just has he'll play a game or he'll come on the pitch, and if he does really well, then he could keep his place. I think it's very 50-50 though. I'm gonna have to sit on the fence for now. I can't tell you whether he's gonna start. I don't think he'll start immediately. I think Mosquera was good against Coventry, Ben White, Gabriel, and obviously Calafiori. I think they'll keep that back four for now, but I can see him playing more once the Champions League kicks off. That's when they start rotating, and maybe he'll play more in the Premier League so they can rest for the Champions League or vice versa. So I see him as a rotation defender for now. But again, if he picks up a good run of form, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go on and keep his place.
Yeah, I suppose because, like you've just mentioned, Arsenal trying to compete in the Premier League, the Champions League, and the domestic cups. And last season, we saw those injuries and fatigue affected the squad at key moments. Yes, they won the Premier League, but didn't quite cross the line to the Champions League. Yes, they made the final, but it just shows you need a strong squad. You need a bit of luck as well, don't you, when it comes to injuries and all of that. But Arsenal, talking of injuries, were also without their newly signed Bruno Guimaraes from Newcastle, because I think of an injury he picked up in training, which was a shame really, because I was so looking forward to seeing him play in the opening game. But that means that's another major signing this season, still to come into the team, to see what he's got to offer. So that's so exciting, isn't it? But probably frightening for other rivals of Arsenal.
Oh, ridiculously frightening. They won 3-0, probably looked the most comfortable team of the weekend. The other one I can think of is Brighton against Aston Villa winning 4-0, but I can't see Brighton keeping that up. Whereas Arsenal, I think that set the tone, and they still have Guimaraes to integrate, so they could use him as a six. We obviously talked about Guimaraes in our last episode, an eight or a double midfield pivot with Rice. And look, if Zolis continues to attack with his confidence, if Odegaard stays fit, Arsenal could have so much more creativity and more variation than they did last season. And that was probably the only criticism towards them, was they maybe relied a bit too much on set pieces, and it worked out okay. But not having to rely on that so much will really help them and make them feel at ease and like they're in first gear. And the important warning, of course, is that Coventry were newly promoted and Arsenal will face much more difficult tests. They've got Aston Villa away next, which will be incredibly different. They'll be played on a Monday night as well, which is obviously very difficult at Villa Park under the lights. So that's a completely different test. But as opening statements go, this was excellent. Arteta said Arsenal flowed well with the ball. They were dominant. They should have scored more goals. And that's a positive assessment. And in this case, the performance did support it.
Can I just say, actually, though, that Villa are not on great form at the moment. So
Mm.
it's probably a good time to face Villa away, unless they regain their form from last season. But looking at, their opening game, they were completely torn apart, so in disarray, and not particularly good scoreline against them. So if Arsenal have to face Villa, then maybe it's a good time to face them before Villa get their mojo back, if they do at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. Aston Villa have lost so many players and just haven't seemed to replace them. I think that's very much related to FFP. But you're right, if Arsenal do want to play Villa, it's now, while their team's not integrated well and while they're coming off of a really poor defeat. But let's leave that there for now, because we've got more exciting stuff to talk about. We're going to move to Chelsea, because their 3-2 victory over Fulham gave us one of the most exciting attacking performances of the opening weekend. Even though the defensive concerns and the goalkeeper remain very serious. But Nadine, they look great going forward, didn't they?
Yes, as a QPR fan through gritted teeth, I'm going to talk about Chelsea now. But I've got to say, I like to try and be balanced, absolutely. João Pedro, Cole Palmer, Morgan Rogers all scored, and that is why Chelsea supporters are so encouraged. It was a great game against Fulham. This was not a match where one player carried the attack. Those three forwards, they combined, they moved intelligently and gave Fulham problems in different ways. And João Pedro, I mean, I literally just sat down, scored just after 31 seconds. Thank goodness I didn't miss the start of the game. He received a pass from Palmer and then lift the ball over Leno, the goalkeeper, I think it was. And it was Chelsea's fastest goal since October 2016. And I'd probably be the fastest goal all season. I mean, who knows? Can you beat that? I think there have been a few, haven't there, in the sort of like the 15 to 20 seconds. But well done, 31 seconds. And that goal, that first goal, immediately showed the value of having players who can make decisions quickly. Palmer did not need several touches. He saw João Pedro's run, released the ball early and allowed him to attack the space behind the defence. And I thought João Pedro looked very, very confident.
He did, absolutely. He's obviously had the summer off, and there was a bit of controversy about the team selection from Carlo Ancelotti in Brazil and the fact that João Pedro wasn't part of that squad. But he's had the summer off. He looks really sharp. And interesting, João Pedro is not simply a penalty box striker. He likes to drop towards the ball, combine with midfielders, and then arrive in the area from a different angle. And we saw that in an abundance against Fulham, that movement which can create space for Palmer. And that Palmer loves that sort of player in front of him that can create that space. And if João Pedro drops deep, the centre-backs have to decide whether to follow him. If they follow, Palmer can attack the space behind them. If they stay in position, and João Pedro can turn and combine. So Chelsea have often had talented attackers, but not always enough movement between the lines. Pedro gives them something you can connect the midfield and the forward line without becoming static. And of course, Nadine, we've got to talk about Morgan Rogers too, right? I mean, because he scored on his debut and he looks like another machine in that attack.
Yeah, he looks so happy to be there. It just felt like he'd been there for years. And watching him after the game, thanking the fans and sort of, I think, cuddling Cole Palmer and chatting with him, he just looked so animated. Yeah, and he was making his debut to having joined Aston Villa, and I think Aston Villa are really missing him, as you saw from their defeat of the first game. Interestingly, for a club record of £117 million, and actually if he carries on in the same form that we saw against Fulham, then that looks like good value money, even though it's an enormous fee.
Oh yeah, it's an enormous fee, and every performance we see from Rodgers will be analysed heavily. But he looked so comfortable, as you said. His goal came before half-time when he followed the play, and although it was a tap-in, it's still important to be in the box and arriving at the right time. And good forwards recognise when the ball is likely to fall in a dangerous area, and that's exactly what he did. But what I've always noticed about Morgan Rogers, and there were so many performances for Aston Villa last season, was his physical power. He can carry the ball over distance, hold off defenders and attack the outside of a fullback. And that gives Chelsea another way of progressing the ball when short combinations and passing combinations aren't available. He knows Palmer well, of course, from their time together at Manchester City, which I think you're going to pick up on, Nadine.
Yeah, I mean, that relationship could become very important, couldn't it? Rogers called Palmer his best friend in football. I thought Jude Bellingham was. He's got lots of best friends, but Palmer's his best matey. And that familiarity is really important because it was invisible, not only after the game, but in the way during the 90 minutes or so that they looked out for each other. And as I've mentioned, they clearly enjoyed each other's company. And when two attacking players understand each other's movement, they do not need to communicate every decision verbally. One player can make a run and trust the other to notice it. So, yeah, they were like twins in many ways. And Palmer often wants to receive between the lines, while Rogers is comfortable moving wide or running beyond the defence. And that creates a really useful contrast. Palmer can attract midfielders towards the ball, then Rogers can attack the space that Palmer has created. And Cole Palmer also looked much closer to the players that the Chelsea supporters know and love. And I think personally he should have been picked by Thomas Tuchel for the World Cup. That was a mistake that he wasn't.
Yeah, and for Chelsea fans, the biggest positive of all of that night would have been Palmer's performance. And I understand what you're saying about the England squad, but he was injured. He had a difficult year, affected by injuries, and I think he played too much football, if I'm being honest, because if you go back to the summer before, Chelsea were in the Club World Cup as well. So he didn't have time to rest them really. So I think he's needed, and he said it as well, he's needed to reset, to recharge, and now he's hungry again for more. And the difference in his movement was so noticeable. He looked sharper when receiving the ball, more willing to run beyond the defence, and more decisive around the penalty area. Palmer is at his most dangerous when he can move between several roles. He can operate as number 10, drift to the right, combine with the centre forward, or arrive late for a shot. The danger for Chelsea is that they become too dependent on him. And the benefit of João Pedro and Rodgers is that they can now carry more of the creative responsibility.
Absolutely. So do you think in all the years that you've been alive, and maybe some of the footage that you've seen before you were born, that this is Chelsea's best front three?
I think it has the potential to, but I wouldn't suggest that after one match. I mean, I remember in 2014-15, I'm an Everton fan, and I went to see Everton against Chelsea that year. Start of the season, they ended up winning the Premier League that year. And wow, all I remember was Diego Costa, the Spanish striker, how good he was. Of course, they had Eden Hazard on the left as well. They had Willian on the right. So I wouldn't say this is the best front three right now, because I think it would take some beating to beat that front three back then. But it has the potential. As we mentioned, João Pedro can link play, can move defenders. Palmer can do it all. He can create, he can score, he can dictate the final pass. And Rodgers as well, he can give power, width, penetration. All three of them, of course, scored against Fulham, which suggests that Chelsea are not relying on only one route to goal. And Xabi Alonso said the combination had great quality in that. If Chelsea can get the three players into good positions, they have the talent to create special moments.
Yeah, and you've already said in a previous episode you're a big fan of Xabi Alonso. So, wow, what an opening match for him. And, you know, he seems to have instilled that enjoyment in the team already, because he talked about he was so looking forward to the season. I thought, is he bigging it up? But actually, you could see the methods that he employs against Fulham, and yeah, he must be delighted, but obviously it's a long way to go yet. But for me, the biggest problem for Chelsea was the goalkeeper, Robert Sánchez. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought, what a major concern. You've got all these amazing players on the pitch, and then you've got this goalkeeper. And I don't want to criticise players too much, because I know you played in goal, and it's easy to criticise a member of the team in a position that very few people want to play, because actually your mistakes are magnified. But it does feel as though Robert Sánchez could be a major concern if the form that we saw the other night is a precursor to what we're going to see for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I thought it was a major concern. And interestingly, I've just read an excerpt which suggests that Chelsea might be interested in Emi Martinez, the Argentinian goalkeeper and current Aston Villa goalkeeper. They might be interested in signing him. So that's going to be an interesting one. But back to Sanchez, I think this makes it hard to assess Chelsea's performance, because he made two mistakes and contributed to Fulham's goal. So Chelsea, I actually thought, were okay defensively. They still allowed a few chances to go. We did see that under Xabi Alonso's side at Bayer Leverkusen. They still conceded quite a bit, even though they scored lots of goals. And for the equaliser, Josh Kingslow's shot went straight through him, and the shot had an expected goals on target value of only 0.05, which means it was considered a very low quality effort once it reached the target. And the Premier League goalkeeper can concede a difficult shot and receive sympathy, but it's quite hard to give him sympathy because it looked like a really routine effort.
Yeah, indeed. And to add to his woes, Sanchez then parried Timothy Castaneda's shot into a dangerous area, then allowing Gonzalo Garcia from Fulham to head in.
Yeah, and that was just as worrying. A goalkeeper does not always need to catch the ball, but if he can't, he needs to push it away and parry it away from danger. And his save created another chance in the most dangerous area of the pitch. And Chelsea had worked so hard to build that lead and go 3-1 up, but their own goalkeeper brought Fulham back into the game. He also had another uncomfortable moment when he came off his line to deal with a long ball, and Chelsea were fortunate that the resulting opportunity was missed.
Yeah, and Chelsea, they do need to think long and hard about who they should have in goal. And it sounds like they already are thinking long and hard, because the mistakes that we saw the other night, they can undermine everything else. So I think it's a really important position that they need to get right and get right quickly.
Yes, absolutely. And they can spend hundreds of millions of pounds in every position in front of the goalkeeper. But if Sanchez is anxious or unreliable, which can easily happen as a goalkeeper, it sets the tone and just spreads nerves amongst the team. And defenders start dropping deeper because they don't trust the goalkeeper behind them. Fullbacks become less adventurous. The midfield may try to protect the penalty area rather than press. You see what I mean? It has a chain reaction effect, and a goalkeeper's mistakes can alter the behaviour of the whole side. And if Chelsea want to play a proactive style, they want to press, hold a high defensive line, build attacks from the back. That does also require a goalkeeper who's very comfortable receiving the ball in tight areas under pressure and also being decisive when leaving his area.
Yeah, but you could say that of any goalkeeper in the Premier League. That's what it demands, doesn't it? That high defensive, hold a high defensive line potentially. But also, the main thing that you need all goalkeepers to do is be comfortable under pressure and decisive as well. They're the qualities that you need of a goalkeeper. I'd like to think you had those qualities, James, when you were in goal.
I don't know about that.
Yes. You already talked about they're looking at another goalkeeper. So do you think it's curtains for Sanchez? Do you think he'll keep his place at all? Do you think they're trying to sort of shift him on?
Yeah, we've already mentioned the transfer deadline day looming. I can't see Chelsea not getting a goalkeeper, whether it is Emi Martinez. I think they will be now in the boardroom talking while we are recording this episode and trying to find someone who can come in there and assert their place as number one. We saw how much it affected Man United when they had Onana and they were really struggling. And since Lamens came, they certainly improved. I can't see Sanchez staying, unfortunately, especially as Chelsea, they have this ambition of they want to go for the league. So for me, I can't see him keeping his place, but if he's got a chance, maybe in the next couple of games, that's his time. So if he's ever going to keep his place, it's now. So he needs to have a really, really good game against Brighton on Sunday, for example. But Chelsea, they need to probably replace him because they can't keep asking the forwards to outscore defensive errors, can they?
No. But the performance was exciting, but it did contain a warning. I think, we've expressed that already for Chelsea's new manager, Xavier Alonso.
Absolutely, and it's Xabi, Mum, not Xavier.
I knew I'd mispronounced something at some point. That's part of the appeal of listening in. When am I going to trip up? And there you go, I just did it.
But regardless, the exciting version of Chelsea is the team that attacks with João Pedro, Palmer and Rodgers. Someone said the attack was JP Morgan because you got João Pedro, the initials of him, and then Rodgers' first name is Morgan.
Well, there are other banks available, we need to point out.
There you go. But the worrying version is obviously that team that scores 3 but still has to defend a nervous final 20 minutes because the goalkeeper's made avoidable errors. But if Xabi Alonso can stabilise that position, Chelsea could become one of the most dangerous teams in the league. But if Sanchez remarkably keeps his place and then continues to make errors, then that attacking quality may not be enough.
So you may then have to roll back on the fact that you think they're title contenders because they don't sort out the defenders and particularly the goalkeeper. Suddenly they're not going to be up there fighting for the title.
Absolutely. The goalkeeper position is crucial. I've never seen a team win the league without a robust goalkeeper. Even the Leicester side in 2016 had Kasper Schmeichel in goal, who was fantastic. So they need a replacement if they're serious about winning the league. But let's move on from Chelsea and look at Hull City against Manchester United. because United suffered such a shocking 2-0 defeat, which I and many other fans of the game found quite amusing. Unfortunately, not for Man United fans, but a promoted side in Hull who were, much better, and United was second best for much of the afternoon. Hull scored through centre backs Semi Ajayi, sorry, maybe that's my mispronunciation now. That's karma for earlier, and Nobel Mendy. What were your opinions, Nadine?
Oh gosh, I'm going to have to go Ajayi. Let's see if I can get it right. Yes, what as you said, both goals came in the first half. Ajayi opened the scoring in the 17th minute, I think, after reacting really the quickest to a loose ball in the box. And then Mendy doubled Hull's lead in the 38th minute after a free kick from Slater. But the goals were only really part of the story. It doesn't sort of say everything. Because interestingly, United had 72% possession, 72% possession, and completed, I didn't count all of these, I've just read the stats somewhere, 574 accurate passes compared with Hull's 177. So 574 to Hull's 177. Yet they never looked like turning that possession into sustained pressure. And that's really a remarkable contrast, which is why I spelt the numbers out. United had the ball, but Hull had the match under control. And that's one of the most important lessons that I've learned in football. Possession is not the same as control. So United were passing the ball, but the passes were often slow. They were predictable, and they played in front of Hull's defensive block. Hull did not have to chase the ball aggressively because United were not moving it quickly enough to make them uncomfortable. And when United did move forward, they often reached the final third without enough players ahead of the ball. And that allowed Hull to defend crosses and hopeful passes without having to make difficult decisions. So fair play to Hull, newly promoted. Well done to them.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. United's passing was very slow and laboured, and that's a very fair description. The problem was not simply that United missed chances, they didn't create enough situations in which their attackers could receive the ball facing goal. And Bruno Fernandes was trying to influence the match, but actually I thought it was one of his really poor games, just in terms of quality and movement really wasn't there. And Hull were very good at nullifying him and protecting the central spaces. United's wide players had to receive the ball too far from the penalty area, and the centre forward was also isolated. Even when Sesko came on in the second half, didn't really change anything, which just shows that lack of creativity in midfield. And the result was a lot of circulation between the centre-backs and midfielders, but not enough penetration. United were moving the ball around Hull rather than through them, weren't they?
Yeah, and Hull, as we've mentioned, had less possession, but still produced a competitive attacking performance and all 3 points.
Yeah, absolutely. Hull's expected goals was 1.26, whereas United's was 1.81. So the underlying numbers don't suggest Hull created a huge number of chances, but Hull were extremely efficient with the opportunities they had. Their first goal came from being alert in the box, and the second came from a well-delivered set piece. And this is a perfect example of how promoted teams can do it against the big clubs. They don't necessarily need to dominate possession. They need to defend their penalty area well, compete physically, attack transitions, and make set pieces count. United had 5 shots on target while Hull had 4, which again tells you that United were not completely harmless, but they were not dangerous enough. A team can have 5 shots on target and still fail to make the goalkeeper feel under constant pressure. And the bigger concern as well was psychological. Once Hull went 2-0 up, United just looked terrible. They did not look like a team coming back at all. Their possession became very cautious rather than more urgent, which you would expect a team like United to increase the tempo and push more players forward. But they didn't do that, and instead they often pass sideways and allow Hull's defensive line to reset.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting, isn't it? Michael Carrick, the new head coach, now on a permanent contract. So when I say new, he was there before, but it was a temporary contract. And it's the kiss of death, isn't it? They've done this before. Solskjaer, when he was sort of temporary in charge, and then as soon as he did really well, and then as soon as he signed a full-time contract, they seemed to unravel. So it does seem to be like the curse of signing the contract. So do we put the blame in Michael Carrick's corner? Was this a tactical failure by their head coach, Michael Carrick?
Partly, but if I'm honest, I think the players need to take accountability, and I thought they were really poor, and the tactics he deployed weren't too dissimilar to that of last season. The interesting part was the new look in midfield, and Yuri Tielemans, who was fantastic for Aston Villa, he scored the first goal for them in the Europa League final last year, which they won. He looked really, really slow and laboured, actually, so that's a little bit worrying for United. But in general, United needed faster ball movement and more runs without the ball. And if the striker's standing between two centre backs, the defenders can just easily remain comfortable. Someone's got to run beyond them, do you know what I mean? And pull them out of position or create a second wave of attack. And they also needed their midfielders to be more aggressive arriving in the box. They needed the fullbacks to create 2 versus 1 situations out wide. And they didn't really do any of these things particularly effectively. Hull were usually able to defend 1v1 or keep enough players behind the ball. And as we said, Hull centre backs, the scorers, Ajayi and Mendy, were fantastic defensively too. And Jacob Greaves as well made so many important blocks and helped Hull to protect their lead. And that matters because United's forwards did get into some promising positions, but Hull were willing to put their bodies on the line.
Yeah, Hull really wanted it, didn't they? And if you think they went up through the playoffs, that controversial playoff, which, who were they going to compete against? And yeah, they've done really, really well. So just 3 points on the board for them, because that's often difficult when you've come up in that playoff position. You're more likely to go down, although I think, was it Sunderland? They were in that position as well. Is that right? I think they went up through the playoffs and have managed to retain
Yes,
their
yeah, you're right.
place. But actually, we've got lots of friends who are Man United fans. We've got lots of people who listen to this podcast who get in contact with us saying, when are you going to talk about Man United? Well, we're going to talk about you now. But do you think Man United supporters in general should be worried after that one defeat? Or do you think that was just a blip?
I think they should have their concerns, and I've seen across social media a lot of concerns defensively too, that they're not strong enough to compete. And yeah, that midfield, I think I can't see us seeing a midfield like that again with Santos and Tielemans in there, because there wasn't quite enough energy in there physically. They're both good on the ball, perhaps, but they need a six behind them. And they might have the answer for that, Nadine, because what recent news have we heard at Man United?
Well, Carlos Baliba, is that who you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, he played for Brighton, didn't he? Brighton and Hove Albion last season, has now arrived at Man United to strengthen the midfield. So could he help with what you've just been talking about?
Absolutely. I think he's a lot more athletic, he's quicker, he's more aggressive in the tackle. And I think if he had been in that midfield against Hull, then maybe United would have been a lot more effective. And when I speak to Aston Villa fans about Yuri Tielemans, they said, for all the amazing things he's done for them, you really need a six behind him to look after him, because if you lose the ball and the other team counters quickly, Yuri Tielemans is not the player to stop those counter attacks. That would be Carlos Baliba's job. And that's where United struggled with that pressure. Tielemans fine on the ball, good passer, good at progressing it, but going back defensively, he's not good enough. So that's going to be interesting to see if Baliba can help that midfield and ultimately help Man United. But
Do you think
moving away from that,
Baliba?
let's
Sorry, do you think Baliba will work well with Tillemans? Do you think that will be a good partnership?
yes, I do. The only thing is though, I find it hard to think that Kobbie Mainoo is just going to be on the bench, because he's fantastic. But you can't play Mainoo and Tielemans because they're both such a similar profile, and you need that defensive midfielder. So I'm Belieber's going to be very important. Tielemans and Mainoo might be choppy and changey, so I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, and before
But
you
let's
move
talk
on,
about.
hang on, before you move on, have you got any Man United players in your football fantasy league?
I do actually. I have Luke Shaw and Brian and Burmo.
And did they score any points for you?
No. Well, they lost 2-0, Mum, so you should know they didn't score any points.
I know. I was being ironic.
No, so I might be looking at shipping them out. Maybe I'll get a Hull City player in instead.
Yes.
But let's move on to Newcastle against Liverpool, because Newcastle may have drawn 2-2, but the performance suggested they shouldn't be written off this season, which many have done so. They twice took the lead through Anthony Elanga and Joe Willock, and they looked sharp, didn't they, Nadine?
Yep, they did look sharp. Before the game, and you mentioned in the intro, there was concern that Newcastle had lost several high-profile players, which would have a negative impact on their season's prospects. So, I was expecting them not to do so well and not look so sharp. So I was pleasantly surprised that they did look sharp on the day, with both goals from Newcastle coming from attacking quickly and making Liverpool defend transitions. Elanga scored inside the opening 5 minutes, if I recall rightly, with Will Osler, who released him, and he finished into the bottom corner. And Cody Gakpo equalised early in the second half, but Newcastle responded almost immediately when is it Wizza? Wissa, yeah, beat several players and then fed Joe Willock, who restored the lead. And then Liverpool then rescued that point with a very late penalty. Dominic Szoboszlai converted, I think it was at the 99th minute. It was a lot of stoppage time.
It was, yeah.
After the substitute Victor, is it Munzes, was brought down?
Munoz,
okay. God, that's 2 I've got wrong now. Oh, what howlers. He was brought down in the area by Lewis Hall, who looked absolutely gobsmacked and inconsolable. It was though, he'd lost a major cup competition. And I can understand that, because it looked like they were going to get all 3 points, but he did look inconsolable, Lewis Hall. And I hope, he's had better night's sleep since then, but I can imagine that would have played on his mind for a long time. And it was cruel for Newcastle, because they defended up until that point with great energy and had looked really the more coherent side for very, very long periods. So Lewis Hall, please move on, because obviously you don't want to be defined by that game. But the performance, I think, was encouraging by Newcastle, particularly considering the amount of change at the club. Newcastle have obviously lost Alexander Isak, Anthony Gordon, Sandro Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes in the last 12 months, while Eddie Howe, as you've mentioned earlier on, has also left. And they have a new manager, don't they, in Matthias Gisel, who's never managed in the Premier League before this season. So there's an enormous amount of change. And so for a first performance, I thought, well done. If you can carry on like that, it's not going to be so bad after all.
Absolutely. And as you said about the player losses and the manager change, it's why so many expected Newcastle to struggle. A club can lose one important player and they can adapt, but losing the spine of your team, several key players, I'm not sure we've even mentioned Anthony Gordon as well, leaving to go to Barcelona. So changing the manager and introducing a new tactical identity is much more difficult. But against Liverpool, Newcastle looked united. They pressed with aggression, played forward quickly, and were willing to attack the space behind Liverpool's fullbacks. The match also showed that the crowd can become part of the tactical plan, and we've seen that for so many years now at St James's Park. It was intense, particularly with former Newcastle and Liverpool figure Kevin Keegan being remembered before the game, which was a touching tribute. And Gisel wanted his team to connect with the supporters, and Newcastle did that by playing with commitment and courage.
Yeah, I mean, I did mention Anthony Gordon just going back, but I didn't sort of go into any great depth. But you're right, that was a big one, wasn't it, to lose to Barcelona? Yes, and just going back to your point, after 4 seasons at Brentford, the recent signing for Newcastle, Wizza, was particularly impressive too. I thought he looked really good, and he looked pleased with his performance.
Yeah, he was outstanding. He created Willock's goal. He carried the ball through pressure. He won 11 duels, more than any other Newcastle player, which tells you how well he did and how important his role on the day was. And he was not simply waiting in the penalty area for chances, like we've just talked about with Man United. He was helping Newcastle progress up the pitch and giving the team an outlet when Liverpool pressed. And Gisel was asked Wissa to be a leader, win the ball and help everyone move forward. And he responded by playing with plenty of authority.
Yeah, and Anthony Elanga also scored his first league goal for Newcastle, and his pace was a real problem, a major problem for Liverpool. And Newcastle were not trying to build every attack slowly. Once they won possession, they looked immediately for Elanga, Weiser, or the spaces around Liverpool's midfield. And that caused problems because Liverpool's fullbacks, Frimpong and Milos, is it Kirkes, were both pushed high at various points. And if Liverpool lost the ball, the space behind them was available. Interestingly, Liverpool had 60% possession and 27 attempts, but Newcastle were more dangerous in the transitions. So Liverpool's possession did not necessarily mean they were the better team, which is a theme that we've mentioned earlier as well. So possession doesn't mean that you're going to do well.
It doesn't, and I believe Newcastle were the better side. Liverpool did create opportunities, but they weren't fluent. The front players did not combine consistently enough, and Newcastle were able to disrupt their rhythm. Cody Gakpo was Liverpool's best attacking player and scored an excellent equaliser, and he's been linked away to Spurs potentially, although that's been put to bed now given they'll be signing Omar Marmoush. But Liverpool needed way more from Florian Wirtz and Alexander Isak. Wirtz was substituted after Newcastle were 2-1 up, while Isak had a very quiet return to St James's Park. And I think if he hadn't been a former Newcastle player, you wouldn't have actually known he had been there. You only knew it because of the amount of booing that took place.
Oh, that's nice of him. Yeah, the atmosphere around Isak must have made that match even more difficult.
Yeah, but I believe Newcastle took it to their advantage, and sometimes controversy can distract a team, but in this case it seemed to energise the supporters and the players, and Liverpool also struggled defensively. Both goals came from Newcastle counter-attacks, and Liverpool's fullbacks were caught too high or too slow to recover. And this is something Andoni Iraola will need to address quickly and promptly, because his side may have lots of possession, but if the fullbacks attack at the same time and the midfield does not protect the centre, opponents will keep finding space in transition.
Yes, but I think Liverpool did show character by scoring so late, so not sort of giving up. They sort of held on to that belief that they could get something out of the game, and that shouldn't be ignored. But as you said, their manager, who came from Bournemouth, didn't he? So an interesting appointment by Liverpool, who did a great job at Bournemouth, but hasn't sort of really made it in sort of the highest level at the Premier League yet. And I'm not sure he will do this season. He thought his team, Liverpool, did not deserve to lose and praised the team for never giving up. But that late equaliser can also hide problems. Liverpool rescued a point, but the performance suggested that they still need to improve their creativity and their defensive balance. Meanwhile, Newcastle can take a lot of encouragement from that performance. They held their own against former champions, played with intensity, and gave their new manager a tactical foundation. I think the concern for Newcastle was that they dropped points from a winning position. They led twice, and they were only seconds away from starting the season with a famous victory. Last season, when we look back, they dropped 27 points from winning positions. So Geisel must make sure that this does not become a recurring weakness for them. They don't want a repeat of that. I'd also like to mention, as you did, that I love the tribute to Kevin Keegan before the game, starting with both clubs united in remembering a legend. And we've mentioned before that I met and interviewed Kevin Keegan before, so it was just such a heartfelt tribute. And I just hope people who don't know Kevin Keegan have now sought him out and thought, wow, what a legend he was.
Absolutely, you're spot on. It was a lovely tribute. And another light story of the episode, but one that's actually generated an enormous amount of conversation online, not for football reasons, was Erling Haaland deciding to change his haircut. He's cut off his famous long blonde hair. And immediately football supporters began asking the only important question: has Haaland just lost his powers? Haaland revealed the new look on social media with the caption, "New season, new trim." Before the haircut, he joked about different styles and appeared nervous as the first section was cut. And Dean, do you think this is a new Haaland and potentially a worrying sign for Man City?
Well, based on his haircut, well, it wasn't a trim, wasn't it? It was a wholesale cut, wasn't it?
Hmm.
Not that I'm particularly religious, and so this is not a religious point, but actually watching Haaland play for Man City for the first game of the season with his new haircut made me think of the Samson and Delilah story. So after Samson's hair was cut very briefly, he lost his supernatural strength. And I felt it was the same with Haaland, who missed some easy opportunities to score against Bournemouth. So maybe he needs to grow his hair back to regain his supernatural strength. So the question is whether Haaland can score without the hair. And if he can't, he's going to need to grow it back.
Yeah, I mean, scientifically, I have no evidence that his hair was responsible for his goals. And in fact, I'm pretty sure it wasn't. But football is built on superstition, and Haaland's hair had become part of his image. There's something almost mythological about it, the long blonde hair, the physical presence, the resemblance to a Viking warrior, the idea that he arrives in the penalty area like a character from a legend. Now he looks younger, slightly more ordinary, which may be bad news for the branding, but perhaps good news for the defenders. If he looks 17, perhaps centre-backs will forget that he's still one of the most powerful strikers in the world.
Well, he didn't look like it the other day. Do you think, though, to sort of flip it, do you think the shorter hair could make him faster? Because there's less hair to carry around.
Well, he actually entertained that theory when speaking to Zlatan Ibrahimovic. If anything, cutting the hair may reduce aerodynamic drag by an absolutely microscopic amount, which means he could gain half a millimetre per hour over 5 yards. Of course, this is not serious football analysis. His powers come from his movement, timing, strength, finishing, and the years that he's played football, not his hairstyle. But the psychological side is certainly worth interesting. I do think when you see players with masks on, like Aubameyang at Arsenal, Rudiger at Chelsea, it just changes them. Or when they put gloves on, even certain things like that can make a big difference. So this is interesting, isn't it, Nadine?
Yes, yeah. I mean, Haaland's caption was like "new season, new trim," suggests that he sees it as a part of a bit of a reset. But he's not had short hair since his Borussia Dortmund days. I think I'm right in.
Yeah, you are, and it's not just a minor adjustment; it's a major change to the look that supporters have associated with his Man City career. I remember watching David Beckham's documentary, and a big part of that was his change to buzz cut hairstyle and just the amount of media and press that brought. So the important question, I guess, though, regardless of it, is whether he starts the season scoring, and he didn't on the weekend against Bournemouth. He missed a big chance as well, and so it was actually quite a poor performance by his standards. But if he scores 2 or 3 goals quickly, everyone will say the haircut has made him even more dangerous potentially. If he misses a few chances, people will be blaming the barber. So that's the way football works. A player's haircut becomes a storyline because supporters want a bit of magic and humour alongside the serious analysis. But Nadine, Haaland went on a call with a couple of people, didn't he?
Yes, I think Guardiola and Grealish have approved it. I think Noel Gallagher burst out laughing. He couldn't quite sort of take in what he was seeing on FaceTime or whatever he was using to connect with Haaland. So I thought that was quite funny. Yeah, and Grealish obviously was at Everton on loan last year, now back at Man City. But I think they gave it the seal of approval.
Yeah, and that's true. But Guardiola's opinion may be influenced by the fact that he'd love to have Haaland's hair. The final verdict will come from the goals, I guess, and if Haaland continues scoring, like he did at the World Cup at his usual rate, the short haircut just becomes a new lucky symbol. But if he struggles, we will all be asking whether the long hair should be brought back for the next big match. But let's now return to some serious European football analysis now, because Celtic suffered one of the most painful collapses of their recent history against LASK. Celtic had won the first leg 3-0. Then they went 4-0 ahead of an aggregate in the second leg through Callum McGregor, but somehow they still lost the tie 5-4 in aggregate after extra time. LASK scored 5 times with Florian Flecker forcing extra time in the 90th minute, and then Samuel Adeniran scoring again in the 109th minute. This wasn't a narrow defeat. Celtic had a 4-goal aggregate advantage and still ended up eliminated. The first part of the collapse was psychological. Once LASK scored, Celtic had to decide whether to continue attacking or protect their lead, and as so many teams do, and as we saw under Southgate, for example, for England, they became passive, and that invited pressure, didn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't believe the score. When my alarm went off, that's the score I heard. I thought, God, how on earth have you managed to lose that tie? And Martin O'Neill, the manager, said Celtic should have been out of sight by half time. He was right. I mean, Celtic had the chances to kill the match off, but they didn't take them. That allowed LASK to believe that the comeback was possible, and what a comeback that was. Football matches can change very quickly when the team that is behind scores again and again, and the crowd becomes louder, the leading side becomes nervous, and every clearance starts to feel like a crisis. I mean, it shouldn't have been that way, really. I think Celtic needed to slow the game down, keep possession, and make LASK, gosh, that's so difficult to say, defend. Instead, they allowed the Austrian side to play with energy and confidence. And O'Neill also said Celtic looked scared to go and win the game. And now they've dropped down from the Champions League into the Europa League, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's really devastating criticism from O'Neill, because it suggests the problem wasn't just technical. Celtic had the players to pass, run, and defend. They just lost their composure. And once LASK were chasing the game, Celtic needed their senior players to just step up. Someone had to demand the ball, draw fouls, slow the tempo, and give the defence a chance to breathe. And instead, Celtic were repeatedly pushed backwards. They were no longer playing the match on their own terms.
Yeah, and as I've just mentioned, they're now playing in the Europa League. And that's significant, isn't it, for all sorts of reasons?
Absolutely. Of course, the competitive nature, if you're a player, a fan, a manager, you want to be in the Champions League amongst the greatest teams to make memorable moments. But just as well, the financial impact that that's going to have is really going to hurt the club behind the scenes too. The Europa League, of course, is still a major tournament, but Celtic were trying to reach the Champions League group phase, and losing that opportunity will really hurt. And this is the second consecutive season in which Celtic have gone out in these qualifiers. Last season, they were eliminated on penalties by Kairat Amati. The manager now has to rebuild confidence quickly. The supporters will not want to hear only about a disappointing night. They want to see how the team responds.
Yeah. And, Martin O'Neill in many ways was sort of Celtic's saviour. He's got a great pedigree, very well respected as a manager. But this is a damning result. Do you think that result damages O'Neill's position?
I don't actually, just because I think we saw the collapse and bottle, if you like, from the players not being there. I think it wasn't him tactically. I just don't think the players conformed to what he wanted to do, and instead they got a bit nervous as a team, which can certainly happen. But it does increase the pressure, and I don't think one result should decide his future. It's just the manner of the collapse is so concerning. And if Celtic had lost narrowly after a brave performance, it would have been a different reaction. But losing from 4-0 ahead raises so many questions. O'Neill, of course, accepted responsibility in a post-match interview and said Celtic had to apologise to the supporters and the club. He also said that the team now had to show what character they had. That's the challenge. The next few matches will reveal whether the defeat becomes a turning point or a lasting wound. And just to leave Celtic there, we didn't quite finish on Carlos Baleba, because that has now been confirmed for Manchester United. And again, to all our watchers and listeners of the show who want us to talk about Man United, we're going back in for seconds just to please you. So we're going to talk about Baleba again, the £70 million deal. He signed a 5-year contract with an option for a further year, and Brighton have also negotiated a sell-on clause. And this is a major investment in a 22-year-old midfielder, especially because Baleba is still recovering from an ankle ligament injury suffered during pre-season. The injury does not mean United have made a bad signing, but it does mean supporters have to be patient. He might not be available immediately, and even after returning, he'll need time to regain rhythm.
So
But in terms of
once he's fine, then what do you think he offers tactically?
tactically, as we've already mentioned, he's a ball carrier. He can receive the ball under pressure. He's incredibly strong and powerful, and he's a great tackler of the ball as well. And that definitely gives United something they've lacked at times, especially against compact teams. And if the opposition blocks the passing lanes, and Baleba can sometimes break the structure by carrying the ball rather than waiting for a pass. He's also capable of playing in open games when there is space between the two penalty areas. He can recover ground quickly and help United win second balls.
Yeah, but there's also a question about whether he's best at the number 6 position or the number 8.
Yes, and that decision depends on the players around him. He's played deeper, but his natural instinct is often to move forward with the ball. I personally see United using him as a 6 just because of the other signings like Tielemans and Santos, who definitely go further forward, and obviously they've got Kobe Mainoo too, and you can't really play without a 6. So I just see him being that deeper player that can sometimes go forward. But Bruno Fernandes too described Baleba as a huge talent with qualities different from the midfielders already at the club. He also warned that Baleba would need time to become an even better player.
But, all of that means that United spending has now reached, I think, £153 million this summer so far. That's quite a lot of money.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is if you compare it to other transfer windows for United recently. And I think they're still struggling debt-wise. And with the new ownership and things like that, it's going to take time for them to splash the cash in the same way we've seen Chelsea do it, for example. But it does create pressure, that spending. United are returning to the Champions League, so the club want to improve the squad as quickly as possible. But a group of new signings, we've seen this time and time again, it doesn't automatically become a coherent team. Baleba's arrived alongside Andre Santos and Yuri Tielemans in midfield, as we've mentioned, and United certainly have options. But let's not forget last season, after Liverpool had won the league under Arne Slot and they'd invested in Vert, Isak, incredible amounts of money here. We're talking 250 plus million just for those two players.
Not last season, the season before, do you mean?
No. The start of last season. Those were
Sorry.
yeah. And obviously it didn't go well because Slot was sacked last season.
Right.
So, it's not just because they're good players for other clubs, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be fluid together. And the defeat by Hull showed that United need more than individual talent. So Baleba may help, but he can't be expected to fix every problem alone. But let's leave United. I hope to our listeners and viewers that we've spoken about United enough. But we're going to move on to Tottenham now, who have agreed a deal to sign Omar Marmoush from Manchester City.
Yes, and Marmoush is expected to join on an initial loan with a £60 million obligation to buy. Gosh, these are huge amounts of money, aren't they?
It is. But really interestingly, Tottenham have also signed Savinho from Manchester City for roughly £85 million. But I think something's going on here behind the scenes because Omar Marmoush, had he been sold on from Man City for over £75 million, then Frankfurt would have received a 10 million fee. But because I think what's happened here is Spurs and Man City have kind of agreed that if Spurs pay more for Savinho, then Man City won't have to pay Frankfurt the money for Marmoush because he's cheaper. And that's really interesting, and it's kind of it raises the question a bit of what are the boundaries in terms of transfers. But everyone was curious as to why Savinho was going for £30 more million than Marmoush, considering Marmoush has played more minutes, he's scored more goals. And that's the exact answer. It's all financial reasons. Man City don't want to have to pay £10 million or more to Frankfurt as a sell-on clause. So that's why it's happened. In terms of the footballing side of it, it's a really important part of Tottenham's attacking rebuild. Marmoush can play centrally or from the wing, which gives De Zerbi flexibility. And he's very quick. He's comfortable carrying the ball and willing to attack defenders, which makes him a very useful player for a team that wants to play with such a high tempo.
Yeah, and he's also following, is it Savio from Manchester City as well?
Savinho, yes, yeah.
Savinho.
And that's what I've mentioned about the financial side of it, which is really interesting. Tottenham have paid £85 million for Savinho, and Marmoush will obviously take their spending higher. I think in reality, Marmoush is the £85 million player and Savinho is the £60 million player. However, again, because of the financial loopholes that we're discussing, that's why it works out to be this way. Let's not forget Spurs have already spent 300 million plus this summer with Tonali, Fernandes, and Jean-Paul Van Heck also arriving. So really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and De Zerbi has made it clear that he wants Tottenham to compete financially with the biggest clubs, but yeah, not particularly good start to the season for them.
No, but he has definitely made a significant change in tone. And when people do question how much Spurs are spending, they have sold really well as well. I think they've made about 130 million at least in sales, so their net spending's not too bad. I know Jed Spence, who had a brilliant campaign for England, he's departed to Inter Milan, which is a questionable sale. I personally would have kept him given how good he was, but they've made sales in other departments. And yeah, look, the question is whether the spending creates a title challenge or simply a larger squad. Tottenham, they have more options now, but they must decide how to balance attack and defence. Marmoush, of course, he could play centrally, but he might start from the left, and Savinho can provide width on the other side. And obviously, Tonali in midfield, Fernandes, who didn't start against Brentford after that embarrassing 3-0 defeat, although I think you would have chuckled at that, Nadine.
Yeah.
But it's just that balance, isn't it?
Yes, and I suppose that pressure must increase because the fees are so large. You can't ignore that, can you?
Absolutely. A player signed for £60 million is expected to make an immediate impact, as is the player that signed for £85 million. But Marmoush is not necessarily being asked to carry the whole attack. His best football could come from combining with other players, like we're seeing at Chelsea with Palmer, Rodgers, and João Pedro. The important thing is Tottenham now have several different ways to attack. They can use speed, crosses, combinations through the middle, individual dribbling. And De Zerbi said he believes Tottenham have no reason why they can't compete with the biggest clubs. That is an ambitious statement, of course, but the investment now gives him the responsibility to prove it. And another big investment and a developing story is Nottingham Forest have made a major move, agreeing a club record fee of around £50 million for Chelsea striker Liam Delap.
Yeah, Delap is expected to undergo a medical and sign a long-term contract. But they need to do something because they've lost to Leeds twice now, haven't they, in the Premier League and also out of the EFL Cup. So, yeah, Nottingham Forest, I think they're going to have a tricky season.
Yeah, it's a really interesting transfer because Delap only joined Chelsea from Ipswich Town a year ago for £30 million. And Chelsea made him available after a difficult campaign in which he scored just one Premier League goal with shoulder and hamstring injuries disrupting and disappointing his season. The key point is that his potential's not disappeared because, of course, before Chelsea, he scored 12 goals in 37 games for Ipswich during their promotion campaign.
So I suppose Forest are hoping they can reignite the fire that he showed at Ipswich. They can bring back the player to life that we saw when he was doing so well, as you said, scoring those 12 goals at Ipswich.
Absolutely. Although I will stress he really struggled at Chelsea and the supporters were not a fan of him. Playing consistently can really help a young striker rebuild confidence, and that's where he struggled. And I think a striker is the one position you need a run of matches, particularly after a season in which they've struggled with fitness and form.
Yeah, and if you think about it, Forest already have Chris Wood and Igor, is it Jesus as well?
Yeah, and that just shows he won't necessarily be guaranteed a starting position because Chris Wood has been fantastic at Nottingham Forest, particularly under Nuno Espirito Santo when they qualified for Europe. But competition can be healthy, and if you're making a £50 million signing, that sounds like someone they want to be playing regularly. Forest, of course, failed to score in their opening Premier League defeat against Leeds, and they also lost against Leeds again last night by 2-0.
Yeah.
Delap gives the manager another option, though, potentially a different style of attack. Woods, is a strong penalty box presence, while Delap offers more running and mobility. Igor Jesus is another profile again. So Forest can now choose the striker depending on the opponent. Against a high defensible line, Delap's pace may be valuable, but against a deeper block, Wood's aerial ability and physical presence may be more useful.
But Forest have also spent heavily elsewhere, haven't they? So, but I still don't know whether that's going to sort of equate to a good season for them.
No, they obviously sold Elliot Anderson for £116 million, but Ousmane Diomande has arrived from Sporting for £34 million, which means Forest are trying to replace a major creative and midfield influence while also adding more quality to the squad. The risk, again, is the too much change part, and that can make a team unstable. But the benefit is that they're not standing still. They've recognised that survival or progression in the Premier League does require depth, and the Delap's transfer will be judged by the number of goals he scores, but it's a sensible gamble. He's young, he's already scored the Premier League, and he has a point to prove. And I still think Forest have too much quality with the likes of Morgan Gibbs White. But yeah, going to be potentially a difficult season for them. But let's leave Nottingham Forest because we're going to just touch upon Barcelona, who are closing in on the signing of Fenerbahce goalkeeper Livakovic.
Yeah, Livakovic is 31 and he's arrived in Barcelona for a medical. So exciting news coming out of the Nou Camp.
Absolutely. He's expected to provide competition for João Garcia, with Wojciech Szczesny also part of the goalkeeping group. Marc-Andre ter Stegen obviously joined Ajax on a season-long loan, and this is a really significant change because ter Stegen had been Barcelona's long-term first-choice goalkeeper for quite a while, quite a few years. So Livakovic brings great experience, international football, and a reputation for performing under pressure, if I can get my words out.
James, do you think he's arriving to replace Garcia or just simply compete with him? Will there be some sort of rotation going on?
I think the competition's the main point because Barcelona do not want to rely on one inexperienced option across an entire season. João Garcia may still be the long-term choice, but Livakovic does give the club an experienced alternative. And if Garcia has a difficult run of matches, the manager can change the goalkeeper without immediately weakening the squad. And it also gives Garcia the chance to learn from someone who has done it in major international and European matches.
Yeah, so Barcelona have already been extremely busy in the transfer market. We mentioned Anthony Gordon earlier on, but there's been other signings as well.
Yeah, he'll be their sixth signing, following on from Gordon, Karim Adeyemi, Jesse Bissou, Rodri, of course, that's a flagship signing, and João Cancelo. So the bigger picture here is that Barcelona are trying to rebuild several areas at once. They have a new goalkeeper situation, a changing defence, and a forward line that does need to replace Robert Lewandowski. And the club, this is quite a big story, is that they are reportedly still interested in Julian Alvarez as a possible replacement for Lewandowski. Interestingly, Julian Alvarez was booed off by Atletico Madrid fans just because he has handed in a transfer request. So what does that say, Nadine?
Yeah, well, it means there's a lot of change for a club expected to compete immediately, particularly when you've got a returning manager coming back to Real Madrid, and there's going to be some real fiery encounters, aren't there, when that sort of Classico games for this season, when they get underway as well. So I suppose Barcelona, there's a lot at stake for them.
Yeah, but they have little choice. Their squad needs to evolve and they can't simply rely on the same players every season. So it might not be a glamorous signing, but it could be one of the most practical. Goalkeepers, ultimately a position where experience can be very valuable. And as we mentioned at Chelsea, that lack of high quality experience could cost them. And if Barcelona want to build confidently from the back, they need a goalkeeper who can pass under pressure, command the penalty area, and make the important saves when needed.
Yes. So even though this goalkeeper may not be a headline signing, he could still have an important role. I mean, I think we'll know more, won't we, whether he's going to be the number one or just there as a backup soon.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's the dressing room as well, Nadine. He could be massively important in the dressing room. So that's going to be really important. But regardless of that, of all the stories we've covered today, that's all for today's extended episode of the Football Fan Fanatics Podcast. To make sure all our episodes drop right into your feed, you can follow our show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen online. To find out more about us, please visit our website, footballfanfanatics.com. And you can also watch us on our Football Fan Fanatics YouTube channel too. We've compiled a guest list of contributors who will be appearing on the show in the coming weeks. But if you're connected with football and would like to appear on the podcast, please get in contact. Details are on the website. Thanks again, Nadine, and see you next time.
Bye.